much of the rest of this chapter, just so you know, are the exercises. I think we'll be able to finish this by 10 o'clock. Take a break then till 10:15. We'll spend about 15 minutes going over the test review, all right? And then about 5 or 10 minutes, I want to show you some tools that I just found that you might find useful for some of the work that you're going to be doing, especially for your portfolio. All right, so adding and removing document nodes. Again, what they're talking about in English is adding something to a web page interactively, which might mean, you know, you're asked questions. So you could kind of build your own web page. Somebody'd say to you, what's your favorite color? And Amin says, I don't know, orange. So all of a sudden the background of his page is orange. He says, well, what's your favorite font color? And he says, well, kind of Halloweenish, so black would look good with orange. So he says black. Now his text is black. Get the idea? So you can do it that way. And then they can ask him some questions about himself. And as he answers them, it could start filling in the text that's on that page. And it would be doing it interactively. As it's adding each paragraph or whatever, they're being added as a series of notes. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right, and you will end up doing this. So notice it says with this photo gallery, because this is the app or the example that you have for Chapter 5, it says it includes giving users the options to add 2 additional images to the screen so they can see all parts of the slideshow at once or navigate from slide to slide. All right, so that's one of the things that you'll be doing in here. Now, on page 309, they talk about creating notes. One thing to realize, so I've got this web page that I'm creating, okay? And I ask you to give me some information. And I create a paragraph node from that. Just because you create a node doesn't put it on the web page. So when you create a node, it creates it, but then it's up to you to add it to a web page. The reason it's done like that, the reason it just doesn't go on your page, is after you create the node, you tell the system where you want it to go. Do you want it to go at the top? Do you want it to go at the bottom? Or somewhere in between? All right, so you've got control over doing that. So when you want to create something new, you use document.createElement. You do need the word document for all these, okay, the way that it's set up. All right. And notice, so if I want to create a div, I say document.createElementDiv. Now there's nothing in it, and it's not on the screen yet. But that will allow me to create a brand new div. That's what they have you do in the exercise on 310, 311, and 312. All right? And then once you've done all that stuff, then you have to take that node that you just created, or that element, and you have to attach it to the document object model. All right? And notice what they say. So you create the element, and then you append it. And here you're appending it as a child. All right? So as it says, a node that you create is not automatically attached to the DOM. Rather, it exists independently of the DOM tree. So it's, for lack of better words, you know, you ever hear the old, not a joke, but it's like, I lived a fairly good life, but maybe not really, so I died, and now I'm in purgatory. So I'm not in heaven and I'm not in hell, I'm kind of in between. That's kind of like when you create an element, that's what's happening. It doesn't exist anywhere but really in the memory of the machine, because it doesn't exist on the web page until you put it there. All right? And as it says, one way of putting it there is to use the append child. So you say, okay, there's the parent, and I want to append to it that. So in this case, I want to append contact to the list. All right? And when you think about it, whether you realize it or not, you do this. There's not a person in this room, to my knowledge, that doesn't have a cell phone. And when you have your cell phone and you create a new contact, in essence, that's what you're doing. Now, the way that it's typically set up on most phones, and you can change this, but when you put it in there, probably put your contacts in there alphabetically, all right, based on last name or whatever. But here, we're telling it, in this case, and I'll take your question in a second, it will attach it as the next child to whatever it is, whatever parent you told it. So this list, if there's a bunch of things in here, this will add a new list element called contact to that particular list. Yes.
You have to camel case
The question was, do you have to camel case these?
the element specifically.
To my knowledge, yes. And there, it'll become even more important later because when you, and I mentioned this the other day, but you may or may not have heard me say this,
Yeah.
but when we get into this in a little more depth, let's say that you wanted to change the font family. All right, so I wanted to go in there and I wanted to do a bunch of this cool stuff and I wanted to change the font family. By default, you put it in like this. You don't do that when you're working with this stuff here because you have to do it like this. If you do it the first way, it thinks that font is a variable and it just tries to subtract the variable family from it. All right, so typically, yes, it'll have to be in camel
What
case.
do you do if you have a div that's like that? You know what I mean? You have a
Well,
dash.
you can name divs anything you want to name them.
Well, I know you can, but
What I'm talking about is are these different commands, like the create element,
Yeah.
etc., has to be in that. So when you're working with different CSS properties or different things, like those have to be in the right case. When you're creating your own stuff, you can use whatever standard you want to use for it. So in the example that they have in the book here, this, if this was called, for example, I mean, you wouldn't use this, but let's say I want to call it Contact Jeff. I could call it Contact and then put a big J and a little EFF, but I don't have to do that. Because when I name it here, I can, that's my variable. Anything that's got a var by it, they're things you're naming. All right? Typically, most developers still use the camel case, even in stuff they're naming. I mean,
even in the
even after the var, everything that's in
or
here.
get element by ID and then set nav list that has to be.
Yeah, this doesn't have to be. This is again, no, this is an ID you made.
Right.
That's called
Well,
nav
it's just
list.
there's so many examples of it being camel cased. You know what I mean?
It's because it's kind of an unwritten standard. That's just the way people do it.
Gotcha.
All right, and the reason is, in some languages, you can use a hyphen between, but some languages don't take a hyphen. So in those languages that don't take a hyphen, you use an underscore. But in those languages that use the hyphen, they don't take an underscore. But every language basically does it like this. And it's kind of used as a way to delineate or break up stuff by using the different caseness. It's not mandatory that you do it, but it's sort of an unwritten standard that just people just do it. I don't know if that's answering your question.
Like
That's,
even in their HTML,
yes,
yeah.
yes, typically that's the way they do it.
Alright.
All right. All right. So it says in the previous pages or steps, you created a new image element and stored it in a variable named new image. You also created a new figure element. Next, you use the append child. All right. So it talks about what you're doing here. It says this creates a document fragment, which is a set of connected nodes that are not part of a document. So you might have a whole bunch of contacts that you've created, but you have not yet connected them using append child or something else. So if you've got one or more, those are document fragments. All right. So they show in the next exercise here what you have to do. Now this, I mean, let's face it, when you look at this, you might look at it and go, it makes sense or it makes no sense. I don't particularly enjoy the author's use of color here. All right. I think that could have been done better than it was, but it does reflect what's going on. Now the other thing too is it reflects what's going on, but does it really? And what I mean is, you can't rip, I mean, I can rip this computer apart, but I have no idea if that's actually what's happening in there, because it's a whole bunch of bits and bytes that are being transferred back and forth. This is just a pictorial representation of what's going on behind the scenes in your computer. So again, you append this on 313 and 314 in the top of 315. Hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense when you're going through those. All right. Then second, it says, sometimes you want to create a new node that's the same or similar to existing nodes in your document. Well, haven't you ever done that where you created it? Maybe I've got it in an unordered list. But for some reason, for now, I just want it to say item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, etc. I could go and create a bunch of those, or I could create one, copy all of them, and then just go in and manually change the text. So they would all, if I made 10 of them, they would all 10 say item 1. but I could manually go in there and change them to item 2, item 3, item 4, etc. When you do that, when you copy something, it's called cloning it here. All right, cloning used to be a hot word. You know, they were talking about cloning sheep, and then that was going to work, and then they were going to clone adults or people, etc., and all that other stuff. But the idea is when you're cloning is you're making a copy. All right. So they have you do one of these starting on page 316. As it says, you'll clone the last figure mode to create the first figure node. All right. And that's on 316, 317, 318, 319, 320, 321. All right. Now on 320, going up all that way to page 320, about halfway down on the page, it says inserting nodes at specific positions in the document tree. If you use an append child, it automatically puts it on the bottom. And when you think about it, that's kind of reminiscent of life, isn't it? All right. If you're the oldest child and your parents have another child, they're beneath you in the pecking order. All right. They come after you. I'm not talking about attention or anything like that, but in the way that you are, as far as if you looked at it in age or in a hierarchy or whatever. But maybe you don't want to do that. And in the example, they have you create here, I think they have you create a bottom node, then they have you clone it into a top node, so now you've got bottom and then top. And then they tell you, but if you want, you can tell it to insert it before something. So you have your choice in the order in which you want to put things. All right. Let's say that I was making some kind of a, I don't know. Let's say I was making some kind of a thing for the 4th of July, and I wanted it to be red, white, and blue, but I accidentally made it red, blue, and white. I could decide when I put it all in there, I could do an insert before, and I could change the order that way. All right, as an example. Maybe not a good one, but as an example. So you do some of that stuff then on 322 and 323 in that exercise. Then on 323, down towards the bottom of the page, they talk about removing nodes. All right, as it says, in addition to creating and attaching nodes, you can also remove them. Maybe you've got something that was put on a page that is no longer relevant for whatever reason. All right, maybe you build a really cool page for someone when they come in and they answer some questions. All right, and now the person is not married. So it comes up and it shows them Match.com and maybe a couple of cool things like that. They're cool. And then afterward, they get married, so they change their status. Well, now that stuff, it might change to things like that. All right? It's funny because on my next birthday, I turned 60, and I told my wife, at least twice a week, I get, what is it? I get an email from Swinging Senior Singles. All right? So I always ask her if I should apply. All right. She just laughs. She says, "Yeah, go ahead. I do." So, all right. Up to page 326. Manipulating the browser with the window object. Now we're not talking DOM so much. We're talking about, remember, there was that window object. And what can you do with a window object? Well, if you look on the next page, and this is 327. It goes all of page 327 and the top part of 328. All right, so 327 has properties. See that? Those are all properties. Those are all aesthetic things you can change. Height, width, etc. All right, and then down here, these are behaviors you can change. So they're methods on the bottom of this page and on the top of the next page. Now, this will probably be one of the harder things for you to understand, and that is, and this is shown in the book here on 328, they talk about the self property. All right? Now, the thing that's weird about this is it's not called the same thing in every programming language. All right? Self, as it says, refers to the current window object. typically self in here will refer to the current object. You don't know what that means, don't worry about it right now. We talk more about objects in the next chapter. The point is, in Java, not JavaScript, Java, they call it this. All right? In, I know in VisualBasic.net, and I think in C# too, they sometimes call it me. So it just depends. It's always referring to the same thing, but it depends on the different language that you're using. So what they're saying is, rather than saying window.close, you can say self.close. All right? So why would you want to do that? All right? It's not so much that you can use either one or both, but you see them both in actual code. So I think for completeness sake, the author showed you that they were here. All right? So on the bottom of the page, opening and closing windows and tabs. You ever do this? Were you ever at something? So I'm here at CNN, okay? And this fantastic beast. I can right mouse click on it and I can choose open a new tab or open a new window. I don't know if you've ever done that or seen that. What they're talking about here is you can do the same thing. So if you decide that if somebody's going to click on your screen and you've got a hyperlink there, you can give them the opportunity, if you want to open that up in either a new window or a new tab, if you want to do that, if it wouldn't do it by default. And they talk to you about a little bit about it in here. All right. And they show you again some of the stuff you can personalize in here. And again, jumping all the way up to 332, you do another exercise. All right? And again, the good thing is every time you're doing this stuff, the author is pretty much every time is showing you pictures of what it should look like when you get done. All right? All right. On 334, I don't want to read to you, but the author talks in here about the window object and some of the stuff that you can use with the window object. So just take a look at that when you get a chance. All right. Then they talk about links and stuff getting hidden behind windows. I don't know if you've ever done this, but if you ever create a web page, the stuff gets laid out on the web page in a certain way, unless you tell it otherwise. But let's say I've got a web page, and on that web page, I've got a paragraph, and then I got a div, and that div has got another paragraph in it, and an unordered list, etc. It'll be laid out top to bottom on the page. But then if I come in and I put in, for example, if I put in an image, and I use absolute positioning, and I tell it to go in position 0, 0, which is in the top left corner, it'll go and it'll appear right over whatever text happened to be there. If I want to do that, I can. All right. So what the author is talking about in here is you don't have to do that. You've got some choice over where you put things on the window. All right. One thing too, and by now hopefully everybody has seen this. If you give something the focus, you've seen this in forms already. I've shown you this, where we take a certain field in a form and we give it the focus, meaning that when the program starts up, that field has the cursor blinking in it. When you give a window the focus, that means it now has control. It is the active window. It's possible for you to have more than one window active at a time. You say no, it's not. How many do I have active here? 5 or 10. All right. When you get done with that, then typically if you've got a window that's not being used anymore, you want to close it. And on 335, down toward the bottom, they talk about the close method. As it says, it closes a web browser window. Typically, that's what you'd want to do. So you go through an exercise, starting on 336, you create a function and an event listener to close the window using the close method. Now, it's important that you understand this. I don't know if it's on your test or not, but this whole topic here of what they call an event listener. Again, the idea is just imagine that what we have here, we don't have a class like this, but imagine the way this class was literally, I never lectured. I never showed you anything that was like, that was in the book, but rather what happened was you had an assignment, and then if you had questions, you raised your hand, okay? And you'd ask, I'd say, okay, Valerie has a question. So she'd ask her question. Everybody would have to stop, and you'd have to listen to the question and then the answer. And I'd say, does everybody get that? And you'd all have to let me know that you got it. You understand what I'm saying? That's kind of how programs work. So for instance, if I have a form on a page, that page is sitting there and it's waiting. I mean, I might have drop-down list where I can pick the state I live in or whatever, but until I hit that submit button, nothing magical is potentially going to happen with that form. So when they're talking about adding event listeners, what they're saying is you adding the code so that when something happens in a program, you make it respond the way you want it to respond. And that's exactly what they're talking about in here. All right, so again, there's an exercise, like I said, on 336, 337, and then jumping up to 338, we're almost done. We're almost done with the chapter. This is what I already mentioned to you, the set timeout, and the working with timeouts and working with intervals. As it says, there we go. The set timeout method, that was neat that came off at the same time. The set timeout, as it says, it's used in JavaScript to execute code after a specific amount of time has elapsed. All right. I don't know if your Outlook is set up like my Outlook is set up, but for instance, if I come in here, my mail has gotten screwed up, but that's okay. And I come in. I'm always afraid that when I do this, I'm going to have something personal on here, but I don't think it'll happen. But if I come in here and I go into here, for instance, I didn't tell you this. This is something I'm going to tell you later, but 2 weeks from today is December 2nd. On December 2nd at 8:30, Shannon is coming in this room for about a half an hour. You are going to fill out a course evaluation form. It'll be similar to the one I gave you, but it's one from Rankin. It's not mine. And she wants to talk to you, etc. And I think also if you're really having some kind of problem with the way that the class is being taught or whatever, you can say that. If you've got comments about me, you can say those. This is probably the time, if she asks if you have any comments, if you do have comments about any other class, this one, like I said, go ahead. But if you have comments about other classes, she's the person you'd want to go to. All right, so if any of you have comments about, because I've heard stuff about your gen eds and stuff. But if you do, that might be the time you might want to say something because you're all here. And if Amin says, oh yeah, I got a problem with this, and then Brady says, yeah, that's right, and then somebody else, that's the time. Because she is the person, when you come in and you talk to me, okay, that's like, my wife gets really miffed at me whenever we drive because, of course, I'm a horn person. Most people when you drive, you either are a horn person or you're not. I'll beep at you for any damn thing you do. I don't care. But I'll just beep at you. And she's like, they can't hear you, but I can. So then I'll really lay on the horn. And they'll sometimes look and I go, yeah, they can hear me too. But she gets mad because I also have a tendency to shout expletives at people where she says, they can't hear you, but I do. All right? But that's your time. So if you're going to speak, that's your time. You'll have your forum to do that. But the point is, if I double click on this, would you agree I should be it should give me a reminder on screen 15 minutes before she comes? Because that's the way it's set up. That's a timeout. That says when that time period has been reached, that code should fire that says, I get a little alert box that comes up, and it says 15 minutes, and it'll say in here, end of course survey with Shannon Bruggeman, etc. It'll do that. All right? Yes?
Where does that get the time from? Is that just from your...
It does. It gets it from the system clock down here. All right? So I suppose if I really didn't want it to happen, I could come down here and change the clock.
Okay.
All right?
That's what I was figuring.
As far as I know, that's what it is. Like I said, I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that's where it comes from. So when you want to set your own timeouts, all right, this would be the code that you wanted to run, and this would be how long. By now, even though we haven't really spent much time on it, you all should know a millisecond is 1,000th of a second. So if I wanted something to happen in 5 seconds, I would have put a 5,000 there, okay? All right. You can clear timeouts. Notice it says you can cancel it before it runs. Again, if I get an email from Shannon that morning, and then she says, I got a meeting in St. Louis, it just came up, I'm going to have to do your thing next week. Well, I'm going to cancel that. All right, and that'll send a cancel timeout message. But typically with a timeout, it's a one-time shot. On the other hand, if we move up to intervals, which are on page 339, that is supposed to run at random intervals. All right, so again, if I want something, maybe I want to, maybe you got ticked at me yesterday, but a couple times I said, you got about an hour. I used to have a teacher, whenever we took, back in junior high, Wally Schoenfeld. I always remember him. All right, I'll give you all sorts of stories and you'd laugh, but he did not like me. Right, hard to believe. But he just, from day one, he didn't like my friend who was Jim Meisnick. He hated us. He would always announce our grades to the rest of the class. He'd say, Mr. Scott got a 6, who was only beat by Mr. Meisnick, who got a 5. And for both of them, I gave him 4 of those points for getting their name correct. He would always say stuff like that, and I could never understand it. I even asked him once, what did I ever do to you? You didn't do anything. Why don't you like me? Oh, I like you. Yeah, sure you do. But the point is, he'd give us a test, and we had 50 minutes, because that's how long the class was. Every 5 minutes, he would have 50 up there. He would erase it and put 45. 5 minutes later, he would put 40, and he would keep doing that. He would never say a word. But that was his way of setting intervals, to let us know how much time we had left in the class. All right? So do you understand the difference between a timeout, which is more or less a one-time shot, and an interval, which happens on a recurring basis? All right, because that's what these sections in here are about. So you do an interval on 339 and 340, it looks like, and 341. All right? And on 341, they start talking about, we're just about finished, the history, navigation, navigator, and screen objects. And most of it is just a bunch of text. So we've got literally like 7 more pages. So the history object, basically it's what you've opened in the current session. And with a history object, you can typically go forward or you can go backward. All right? So if you want to be able to jump to different pages. Now think about why that might be important. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but I've already opened up a page, and for some reason it gives me an error or whatever, and I go back to the other page, but I want to see where that page was for where that error, and I can't go back to it. So if you were writing your own website and you had broken links in there, you might use something like the history object to be able to iterate your way around the site to see why something isn't working. All right? And the author talks about the history object on 341, 342. He mentions the go method, as it says, where you can go forward or you can go backwards to different pages, etc. Then there's the location object. Allows you to change to a new page from within the JavaScript code. Most important one. Have you ever seen this? Where, okay, let's suppose, for example, that I was one of the bigwigs at Google.com, okay? And what I decided to do was, not when I bought Google.com, I also decided I was going to buy Google.net, Google.org, etc. And if anybody ever went to Google.org, I would just redirect them to Google.com. You ever had that where you're on a page and you get redirected to another page? Sometimes you get a message, sometimes you don't. All right? You can do that with a location object. You can redirect people. So if they had a broken link, you could redirect them to some other page. All right, if you wanted to do that. The stuff you can do with it is shown on the bottom of 343, the properties and the methods. All right, and there are just some very small examples in here, all right, on 344. Next is the navigator on 344, 345, and the top of 346. What the navigator can do And this is really powerful stuff, just so you know when you look at this. You can look and find out what browser the user is using, what version of the browser the user is using. You can find out the operating system that they're using. The plan originally was, I think, that you were going to be able to write apps where if Brady comes in and he's using a Linux box, I would know that. Then if Dominic comes in and he's using a Mac, I would know that. Then if Amin comes in and he's using a Windows machine, I would know that. They might all be running the same browser, they might be running different browsers, but if I want to do some sniffing, and that's what it's referred to as far as the information. So if I want to know how many, you can use some of this stuff is used in analytics. I don't know with Google Analytics if they burrow that deep. So if I wanted to know how many people are coming to my site from a Mac, I don't know if I can do that or not, but I could get that kind of information from using a navigator object. All right. So again, they talk about it a little bit on the bottom of 344 here, all of 345, and then the top of 346. And they mention on the top of 346, it says browser sniffing is a challenge. Again, what I started to get to earlier was the idea was that you were going to be able to write a website that would immediately know the browser you were using and the platform you were using, again, Mac, Windows, whatever, and it would have your website would be tailored to that. But there's not that many platforms, but there's so many different browsers. I just saw an article the other day that Firefox just released version 50 of Firefox. That's 50 versions. Are you really going to want to have 50 different possibilities for anybody who has any of those versions of Firefox? No. But some of that kind of stuff is done. Think about it. Isn't that what responsive web design is? To make sure your page looks okay regardless of whether you're using it on a big screen or a phone. All right? But again, browser sniffing, as it says, it's a challenge. It's never really caught on like people really thought that it would. And the last thing that's in here is the screen object. As it says, it's used to obtain information about the display, the size, the resolution, and the color depth. And again, not used as much because you have tools like, Bootstrap, for example, where you don't have to worry about that. And you have things like media queries where there's natural cutoff points. All right? So that's, again, discussed on 346, 347, and 348. That's it for the chapter. Before we take a break, because we'll take one before 10, but I sent you this morning, but maybe it'll be a little bit easier this way. What I want all of you to do is take a look at a couple things. All right? First thing I want you to do is I want you to come out here. And I'm gonna blow these up each time so you can see them. I want you to go out there. It's a cool tool that I found when I was doing something else yesterday. I'm not going to take any credit for this, but it's something that you might want to use. So it's layoutit.com/build. We're going to look at 4 or 5 sites, then we're taking a break. After the break, we're going to come back and go over the test review, and then the rest of the period is yours. Now, you might not think this is a big thing, but please look up on the screen here. Okay? I can come in here now and, okay, I've got this stuff. This is just stuff I've created. I just threw it in here. But I want to come in here and I want to add a paragraph. See what I can do? I can just drag it right onto my site. And it'll build the site for me, basically, in Bootstrap. I just added all this stuff myself. Then I can preview to see what it looks like. And there it is. Now, you can say it doesn't look very good. That's not the point. I can still go and change it any way I want. But when I get done, I can then go to download, which will give me the code. Why is that important? Because you are required. I want you to do your portfolio in Bootstrap. And I know that's a pain in the ass. I know what some of you think about Bootstrap. I don't care. Because there's a good chance that one or more of you are going to end up becoming Bootstrap developers. So even if it's not perfect, but this is something that can get you started. All right, there's a lot of dragging and dropping that you can do to set things up for you. All right, and if you say, well, you know, I tried doing it and I couldn't, then don't do it that way, but you probably won't get all the points then. This is the home page for it. It says create simple front end quickly with using Bootstrap. All right, and I do believe there's a demo on here. I do believe that you do have to register to be able to download it. I've registered. They haven't sent me anything yet. All right, but so I don't think it's going to be a problem. All right, I'm going to show you a couple more of these. This next one, it's called boottheme.com. So there was the first one. Here's the second one. Boot theme. Notice there's two T's, because it's two words. Boottheme.com. Again, sometimes when people see stuff like this, if you look up on the screen here, build a web page in 5 minutes, no coding required. All right, I'm in. You know, a lot of people are like that. No code? It's going to write code for me? I'm in. It isn't Wix or one of those things you see the commercials for. And they even say in here, it's designed to get you started. All right? So again, I believe that in this one, also like the other one, so it says start now, okay? And it says step 1, web designer, okay? So I want a title. Boom, I drag, there's my title. I haven't done too much work with this stuff, so I'm not very expert on it at all. I just found out about this stuff the other day. But it's stuff that you might want to use. And again, when you get done, you can preview it. All right? And I don't know why it's showing it like that, but it is. And you can grab the code and you can download it, but again, you must sign up in order to do that. If you go, I don't want to sign up, well, then you won't be able to do it. All right? You know, and if you don't want to use it, you sure as heck don't have to. All right, so that was Boot Theme. There's another one that's called Boots. It's really called Boot Swatch. And some of you may have even seen this already. I have no idea. What that has is it has free themes that have already been created for you. Free meaning that you can use them at no cost. So you could use one of those other two products that I mentioned to you, get your stuff set up, and then come in and bring in a theme and drop that in. See what I'm saying? If you want to do that. Now, part of the problem with Boot Swatch is they do have a lot of themes. I don't know how many, but they do have a lot. I think there's even more than this. All right? But after a while, oh, I know where you got that from. So it takes a little bit of the creativity away, you know, because yours might look like someone else's. All right, so you'd have to go in and at least change colors or whatever. All right, here's another one. And again, this is a little bigger, so I'm going to have to change my font size because I think it's going to flow off the screen otherwise. Yes, it is. And that's it right, come on, get bigger. Right there. It's plugolabs.com/Twitter bootstrap -button -generator. Now, does everybody, you know, I'm going to ask a question. I'm not trying to insult you, okay? Does everybody know how to set bookmarks? All right? You might want to bookmark some of these things. Again, if you decide, I don't like any of them, then don't bookmark any of them. That's okay. But it's a fast way to be able to get back to them. I did send you every one of these links today in an email. So you've got about, you've got a thing in here with about 6 different links on it, okay? So you've got all these. Now, couple things. If you look up on the screen, it says Twitter Bootstrap button generator for Twitter Bootstrap 2. Well, we're using 3. And guess what? 4 is even out. But they have a thing in there you can switch to 3. All right? And I want to tell you something just so you hear this. Notice there's some extra glyphicons and stuff in here that you can use. All right? You're probably not going to want to use these for glyphicons for 2 reasons. One is there are places that have got a lot more glyphicons than this. The other thing is, just so you know, those built-in icons, those glyphicons, for Bootstrap 4, they got rid of them. You don't get built-in Bootstrap glyphicons anymore. They tell you to go out to Font Awesome or these other places and grab them from there. All right. But what's kind of cool is, please look on the screen here. So I decide I want this. What does it do? It shows me the code to create buttons like that. So if you think, geez, I don't really remember. I'd like to create something that's like this, but I don't know how to do it. So you click there, and I don't remember. You do that, and it shows you the code to do it. That's why it's kind of nice. It's somewhat of a code generator for you. All right. There's one more, and that's it. And it's called bootsnip.com. So that's it right there. Again, 2 P's on the end because it's short for snippet. So bootsnip.com. And it's similar to some of the other stuff I've shown you. I should have done a better job because some of these tools have been around for a while. All right? But especially that first one that I showed you, that build tool, it might be something that you've got an interest in. I haven't even looked at the demo on it. I did look on YouTube, and they have a couple little demos on it, and it might be the same demo they show on here. I don't know. But it was only 2 or 3 minutes long. But this does give you some more resources that you can use. You should at least, I think, be trying to devote an hour or 2 a week to trying to lay stuff out for this. All right? And this will be something, just so you know, Evan has now sent me the stuff, so I have to recreate all of your logins. They're all going to be put out there the last day. All right? That's going to be worth, I don't know how much this last thing is worth. If it's 100 points, 10 of it is going to be you putting it out there and having it out there under iwt.rankin.edu, because I want all of them to be out there by the time you leave for break. All right. If I happen to meet anybody during the break, and I want to, especially local people who might be looking for a possible future intern, I want to be able to tell them where to go and whose sites they can look at, because then they'll have examples of your work. All right. So, like I said, you have. I go back to mail here. I sent all of you this thing, and it just says Bootstrap URLs. These are the ones that we just looked at. These are all of them. Except there also is a GitHub repository. I didn't even go through that with you. You can look at that if you have an interest. But you've got all these. They were all sent to you this morning. All right? It is 10. Let's come back at 10:10, and we'll see if in 20 minutes we can do the review for the test. All right?
Do you have a rubric for the portfolio?
I don't know if there's one created. Otherwise, I'll have to create my own. Evan's either going to be very happy with me or very upset with me when we meet, because I don't like his tests at all. So all these tests, if you don't like them, the first 2 you took, I wrote them. Because I don't like the way he writes tests. All right. And I don't mean all of them, but the 2 that I've seen. So I'll look at his rubric and I'll see if it's good, and if it is, I'll use it. Otherwise,
Just that one portfolio, and that's where I asked you about the client, if you're really gonna build a website on
yeah,
that.
no, that's, like I said, I don't know how he does that. Unless he's making students go out on their own. And let's face it, I could just see that if there's a local business, first you go in there, then you go in there, then you go in there, etc. They don't want that anyway. All right, and I could force you, I guess, into, yeah, you got to find a client, you got to make a site for them, even if it's a mythical site. I'd rather have you still concentrate on your portfolio. That's why I'm doing it that way. And Evan, if you ever hear this tape, it's not you, it's just some of those tests that you've written. I'm teaching it a little bit different way than you are, so that's why the tests are a little bit different.